Representative Ocasio-Cortez, I genuinely value your presence here to clarify your economic frameworks for us ordinary folks in the Senate. Senator John Kennedy's Louisiana accent was as thick and slow as molasses on a frigid winter morning. He beamed with the warmth of a kindly grandfather preparing to serve sweet tea and homemade biscuits. His reading spectacles perched low on the bridge of his nose, while a plain legal pad sat before him, completing the image of a rustic attorney from Baton Rouge. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez returned the smile from the witness table, radiating the confidence of someone wearing a designer ensemble that likely cost more than the weekly wages of most citizens. She appeared ready for Instagram, having already shared 3 selfies from the Capitol complex earlier that very morning. This elderly Southern legislator did not seem like he would pose any significant challenge to her agenda. She had successfully navigated Fox News and debated various Republicans, so she assumed this interaction would be effortless. She possessed absolutely no inclination that she had just stepped into a snare laid by an Oxford-trained legal scholar who excelled at feigning simplicity. The hearing room for the Senate Budget Committee was filled to capacity, with every major media outlet in Washington present to capture the event. The press adored AOC, celebrated as the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, a democratic socialist with millions of online followers, and the figurehead of the progressive movement championing the Green New Deal. Senator Kennedy, however, had been patiently anticipating this specific encounter for years. Now I must confess, Kennedy continued, his drawl becoming even more pronounced, that I am merely a humble lawyer from Louisiana who received his education down in Baton Rouge. He conveniently omitted any mention of Vanderbilt University, where he graduated magna cum laude as Phi Beta Kappa and president of his senior class. He bypassed his time at the University of Virginia School of Law, where he was inducted into the Order of the Coif, and served as executive editor of the Virginia Law Review. He certainly did not bring up Oxford University, where he achieved a Bachelor of Civil Law with first-class honors. No, he maintained the facade of a simple country attorney and nothing more. Therefore, when you discuss expending $40 trillion, which is roughly the amount you are proposing according to my calculation, you will need to explain it very slowly for individuals like me who lack the intellect of Boston University economics majors. AOC's smile broadened as she relished the opportunity to educate others. Senator Kennedy, the Green New Deal represents a vital investment in our collective future. Oh, I am quite fond of investments, Kennedy interjected cheerfully, sounding as if she had just referenced his preferred dessert. I served as the state treasurer of Louisiana for 17 years and managed a few $billion of state funds. It was not 40 trillion, mind you, but merely a few billion here and there. His pleasant expression never wavered, yet something in his gaze transformed, becoming sharper and more intense. So please assist me in understanding, my dear, when you use the term investment, you imply that we will eventually recoup that capital, correct? Just as when I invest in a corporation, they provide me with a return that includes interest. AOC paused for a brief moment, marking the first fracture in her confident demeanor. For 7 years, the former service industry worker turned socialist had been the media's darling, shielded and celebrated while her errors were overlooked. Her lack of economic expertise was often rationalized, and her social media activity was treated as political brilliance rather than performance art masquerading as governance. Today was distinct because she was facing the country lawyer, a man who had overseen billions in state finances. He had taught constitutional law at LSU for 14 years and decimated unprepared judicial nominees with folksy inquiries that exposed their lack of knowledge. He had made wealthy CEOs appear foolish using basic arithmetic wrapped in homespun philosophy, and he had been cataloging her errors for years. Every misstatement, every economic absurdity, and every instance where she confused fundamental concepts while boasting of her economics degree had been noted. The country lawyer was prepared, and the progressive representative had no concept of the dismantling that was about to occur. The Senate Budget Committee room hummed with the unique electricity that arises when political theater intersects with actual governance. Cameras lined every wall, and the media gallery was packed to standing room only. C-SPAN had upgraded to multiple camera angles instead of their customary single static feed. The official objective was routine testimony regarding proposed climate legislation. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, now in her 7th year in Congress, had been invited to elucidate the updated version of her Green New Deal to the Senate committee tasked with determining its fiscal feasibility. However, everyone in that chamber understood that this was far from a routine proceeding. Senator John Kennedy had specifically requested AOC's presence for testimony and personally ensured maximum media attention. He had prepared for this occasion like an attorney organizing the closing argument of his entire career. Kennedy sat at the center of the committee members' raised platform, wearing a simple dark suit with no designer label. His reading glasses likely came from a drugstore, and a yellow legal pad lay before him alongside a basic calculator, the type one might purchase at a discount store for under $10. The other Republican senators were attempting to suppress their smiles. They had witnessed Kennedy in action previously and watched him dismantle overconfident witnesses with questions so simple they initially seemed unintelligent until they exposed the flaws in the policy under discussion. The Democrats appeared cautious, having tried to keep AOC away from this committee by suggesting written testimony or offering to have staff answer questions. Kennedy had insisted politely, in the manner he insisted on everything, with a smile and a modest demeanor that made refusal seem discourteous. AOC arrived at 9:48, exactly 12 minutes ahead of schedule. She moved through the hallway with determination, wearing a deep green designer outfit with gold accents. It was a boutique brand that likely cost more than the average American's monthly housing payment. Her signature red lipstick was applied perfectly, and her hair was styled with precision, suitable for high-definition television. She was accompanied by 3 staff members, all young and dressed in similarly expensive attire, constantly checking their mobile devices. The digital-savvy Congresswoman never traveled anywhere without her social media team. She had posted earlier that morning about fighting for working families and forcing billionaires to pay their equitable share. That post had garnered 70,000 likes before she even arrived at the Capitol. Kennedy observed her entrance, nodded politely, and smiled as if she were a neighbor's daughter arriving for Sunday dinner. Chairman Lindsey Graham called the hearing to order at exactly 10 in the morning. Following standard opening remarks and the introduction of the witness, he reminded everyone that testimony was voluntary, but questions would be posed. "Senator Kennedy," Graham said, fully aware of the dynamic he was facilitating. "You requested Representative Ocasio-Cortez's presence today, so would you like to commence the questioning?" "Why, thank you, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy replied with a smile that could have marketed ice in the Arctic. "I certainly would like to proceed." He looked at AOC over his reading glasses, resembling a grandfather regarding his granddaughter with patience and kindness. "Miss Ocasio-Cortez, thank you for attending today, as I know you are incredibly busy with your Instagram and TikTok videos and all that modern technology I do not quite comprehend." This was the first subtle dig, polite but undeniably present. AOC smiled back, stating she was happy to be there. "Senator, now, I have been reviewing your Green New Deal, and it is quite a document, mighty ambitious." He held up the printed pages and noted that her original proposal states, "We are going to retrofit every building in America to make them energy efficient. Is that accurate? Yes, Senator. We need to address the climate crisis. Every building, Kennedy repeated, looking genuinely confused. Like all the buildings, including the houses in Louisiana and the ones in New York across all 50 states. That is the comprehensive nature of the proposal, yes. Kennedy picked up his calculator and studied it as if it might be deceiving him. How many buildings are we discussing in total? Well, all residential and commercial structures. I am looking at figures here that suggest America has about 140 million buildings. He displayed his legal pad to the camera, revealing large handwritten numbers. Does that sound approximately correct to you? I believe the estimates fall within that range. And you intend to retrofit all of them within 10 years? That is the timeline we have proposed. Kennedy began punching numbers into his calculator with exaggerated motions, engaging in physical comedy as if shocked by the results. Let me see if I can perform this arithmetic correctly. 140 million buildings divided by 10 years. He looked up, eyes wide with feigned surprise. That amounts to 14 million buildings a year, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. It is an ambitious goal. Ambitious, Kennedy repeated, as his eyebrows shot upward. Darling, that is 38,000 buildings every single day, including Sundays, Christmas, and the 4th of July, for 10 straight years. Quiet laughter rippled through the room. You see, I used to volunteer with Habitat for Humanity, who are good folks. We would gather perhaps 40 volunteers on a Saturday, and we could construct one house if we worked very hard from sunrise to sunset. He performed more calculations, writing on his legal pad. 38,000 buildings a day requires more workers than we currently have in America. The room laughed louder now, prompting AOC to attempt a recovery. Senator, the proposal includes workforce training and job creation. Oh, I am certain it does, Kennedy replied, his cheerfulness now weaponized. But help me understand something. You are going to train people to retrofit buildings while simultaneously retrofitting all the buildings? That is akin to attempting to change the tires on your car while driving down the highway at 70 miles per hour. He placed the calculator down and looked at her with grandfatherly concern. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, have you ever physically built anything? Perhaps with a hammer and nails? I have worked in the service industry. That is a no, then. Kennedy smiled. See, I ask because anyone who has constructed things understands that construction takes time and cannot be willed into existence by a government program. He flipped to another page of the Green New Deal. Now, this section here really captures my interest. It says we are going to provide economic security for all who are unable or unwilling to work. That was in your original draft. Do you recall that? AOC's face flushed slightly as she claimed it was an error in the FAQ document. An error? Kennedy said, looking flabbergasted. Ma'am, how does one accidentally promise to pay people who do not wish to work? The room erupted in laughter, and even some Democrats were concealing their smiles. I mean, shoot, if we are paying folks who refuse to work, I might retire early myself. Kennedy slapped his knee. But seriously, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, that was not a typo. That was policy because your office published it. It was not a hacker. That was you. He was still smiling and appeared friendly, yet he was systematically dismantling her credibility. And then there is this section about eliminating emissions from cows. He delivered the line with perfect deadpan seriousness, which most interpreted as wanting to stop cows from producing biological gas. Is that correct? Full room laughter ensued as people could not help themselves. Senator, that is a deliberate mischaracterization. Is it? Kennedy held up the document. It says right here that we must fully get rid of bovine emissions. Those are the exact words from your FAQ, and I have the screenshot right here in case you deleted it. He produced a printed screenshot and displayed it to the camera. Now, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, I must tell you, being from Louisiana, we have cattle. I hate to break this to you, but cows are going to continue their biological processes whether Congress passes a bill or not. It is simply nature. He paused for comic timing. Unless you are planning to attach some kind of diaper contraption to every cow in America, which honestly would create jobs, I suppose. Someone has to manufacture 40 million cow diapers, but the environmental impact of washing all those diapers would be significant. Even the Democrats were laughing now. Kennedy allowed the humor to land before shifting his tone slightly, remaining friendly, but with an underlying edge. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, let me ask you something very simple. He removed his reading glasses and made direct eye contact. You graduated from Boston University with a degree in economics, correct? Yes, that is a fine school, a truly fine school. He nodded appreciatively. So you studied supply and demand, opportunity costs, and basic market principles? Of course. Good. That is very good. He replaced his glasses. So then you understand that when you promise everyone free health care, free college, free housing, guaranteed jobs paying $15 an hour, and guaranteed income for those unwilling to work, it is not actually free, right? He waited, letting the question hang in the air. Someone has to pay for all of that, and that someone is the American taxpayer, including folks like me who already give about half their income to the government in various taxes and fees. Kennedy retrieved the economics textbook he had mentioned. He actually had one with him. See, I borrowed this from my granddaughter, who is studying economics at LSU. She is likely using the same textbook you used at BU. He opened to the first chapter and noted that it says right here on page 1 that there is no such thing as a free lunch. Actually, it says there is no such thing. But I prefer the colloquial version as it is more colorful. Laughter occurred again. The point is, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, everything costs something. And when you promise $40 trillion worth of programs, which is what economists who perform the calculations say your Green New Deal costs, someone has to write that check. He leaned forward. So here is my very simple question. Where is the money going to come from? AOC began her standard response about taxing the wealthy at higher rates. All the wealthy, every billionaire and millionaire in America? Yes, we need to ensure the top 1% pay their share. Okay, let us perform that math together. Kennedy picked up his calculator again. America has about 700 billionaires. Their total net worth is about $4 trillion. So if we confiscated everything they own, including their companies, houses, cars, yachts, watches, and shoes, we would have $4 trillion. He looked up. You need 40 trillion. So where is the other 36 trillion coming from? Silence came from AOC, and that assumes those billionaires just sit there and allow you to take all their assets, which they will not. They will move to Switzerland or Monaco or some island that does not tax them excessively. Then we will have zero of their money. Kennedy sat back. See, that is the problem with socialism, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. Eventually, you run out of other people's money to spend, as Margaret Thatcher, a smart lady, once said. He smiled his grandfather's smile again. Bless your heart, darling. But you have never actually run a business, have you? There it was, the first official use of the phrase, the ultimate Southern insult disguised as a blessing. AOC did not even catch it, thinking it was genuine sympathy. I have worked in restaurants. Working in a restaurant is not the same as running a restaurant, sweetheart. Kennedy's smile remained fixed. One involves taking orders from customers. The other involves paying rent, making payroll, keeping the lights on, dealing with health inspectors, managing inventory, and hoping you do not go bankrupt. He gestured to his calculator and papers. And that is the problem with your Green New Deal. It is written by someone who has never had to meet a payroll, never had to choose between hiring someone or paying the electric bill, and never risked her own money on anything. She never ran anything except a social media account. Said so nicely and politely, it was absolutely brutal. So maybe before we spend $40 trillion on your dream, we should ask someone who has actually managed money before. Like, I don't know, someone who was state treasurer for 17 years and managed billions of dollars without losing any of it. He looked at the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have many more questions, but I do not want to monopolize the time. Graham smiled. Senator Kennedy, I think you have just scratched the surface, so please continue. Kennedy grinned and picked up a new page of notes. All right then, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, let us discuss some of your other economic ideas. This should be engaging. The country lawyer was just getting warmed up, and the progressive representative was starting to realize she might be in trouble. Senator Kennedy settled back in his chair, getting comfortable like he was about to tell a long story on a front porch somewhere in rural Louisiana. You know, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, I taught law at LSU for 14 years, mostly constitutional law. I love teaching because there is something special about helping young minds understand complex subjects. He smiled warmly, perhaps too warmly. So maybe we can have ourselves a little economics lesson right here today for the folks watching at home who might not have had the benefit of a Boston University education like you did. AOC shifted in her seat, starting to sense this was not going her way. Now I am going to play you a little video here, and I hope you do not mind. Kennedy nodded to a staffer who started a video on the committee room screens. The video showed AOC on a podcast, young and confident, explaining economic theory. Her voice from the video stated that we are really in a Keynesian moment. And I think Milton Keynes was really onto something when he talked about government spending during recessions. Kennedy paused the video. The room went silent. Then someone snorted, trying to hold in a laugh. Milton Keynes, Kennedy repeated slowly. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, I am afraid I have some disappointing news for you. He pulled out a photograph and showed it to the camera, depicting a British town with shopping centers and modern buildings. This here is Milton Keynes. It is a town in England. Nice place, as I have been there a few times when I was studying at Oxford. They have a good shopping mall and some nice roundabouts, but it has never written a single economics paper. The room exploded in laughter. I think maybe you meant John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist, or Milton Friedman, the other famous economist, but you you mushed them together like mixing up peanut butter and jelly and ending up with a British town. He grinned wide. Bless your heart. That is like me saying I went to Harvard-Stanford Law School or studied calculus algebra in college. You cannot just combine two different things and hope nobody notices. Second official, bless your heart. This one had more edge. Economics degree from Boston University, right? He said it with maximum Southern skepticism. Did they teach you about Milton Keynes's town? Was that a special course? Even the Democrats were struggling not to laugh. AOC tried to recover. Senator, that was clearly a verbal slip. A slip? Kennedy looked genuinely puzzled. Ma'am, you did not just say it once. You referenced Milton Keynes 3 times in that interview. You talked about his economic theories, his approach to government spending, and his views on monetary policy. He shook his head sadly. The town of Milton Keynes does not have views on monetary policy. It has views on whether to build a new grocery store, but that is about it. He pulled out another video. Now this next one is from PBS. The video played AOC explaining unemployment. Her voice stated that unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Unemployment is low because people are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely feed their families. Kennedy paused it again. "Help me understand this, Miss Ocasio-Cortez." He pulled out a piece of paper. "Because I am just a simple country lawyer, but I am pretty sure that is not how the unemployment rate works." He started drawing on his legal pad, making simple stick figures. Unemployment rate measures people who do not have jobs and are looking for work. If somebody has 2 jobs, they are not unemployed. They are superemployed. Very employed. Employed squared. He showed his stick figure drawings to the camera. One stick figure had 2 briefcases labeled very employed and working 60 hours a week. That also means you have a job. As unemployment and employment are kind of opposite thing, he looked at her with genuine concern. "Now, did Boston University not teach you this? Because if they didn't, honestly, you should ask for your money back. That is pretty basic stuff. That is like Chapter 1 material." The economic lack of knowledge was being exposed not with anger, but with humor, which somehow made it worse. Kennedy turned to a staffer. "Can we get someone from Boston University on the line? I want to talk to them about their economics program." Laughter erupted. "I am kidding, mostly," Kennedy grinned. "But seriously, folks, this is the person writing economic policy for America. She cannot tell the difference between employed and unemployed, thinks there is an economist named Milton Keynes, and somehow graduated cum laude." He pulled out more papers. "Let us talk about your Amazon victory. Remember when you chased Amazon out of New York and cost the city 25,000 jobs? AOC tried to interrupt. "Senator, those jobs came with $3 billion in corporate welfare." Kennedy held up his hand in a traffic cop motion. "Stop right there. Let me explain something to you real slow because this is important." He pulled out 2 actual buckets and set them on the table in front of him as physical props. "This bucket," he pointed to the left one, "represents money the government has, tax revenue already collected sitting in accounts. Real money." He pointed to the right bucket. "This bucket represents money the government does not have yet. Future tax revenue that might come in if businesses and workers are there paying taxes." He picked up the empty right bucket. "Tax breaks are this bucket, the second bucket, the one with nothing in it yet. You cannot spend money from an empty bucket, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. You understand that, right?" He paused and waited. When New York offered Amazon $3 billion in tax breaks, they were not writing a check for $3 billion. They were just saying, "We will not collect as much taxes from you in the future." The money was not there to spend on teachers or health care or anything else, because it did not exist yet. He was talking to her like she was in elementary school. But when you chased Amazon away, you also chased away 25,000 jobs. Those folks would have paid income tax, property tax when they bought houses, sales tax when they bought goods, and restaurant tax when they went out to eat. Kennedy did quick math on his legal pad. 25,000 people making an average of $80,000 a year. That is $2 billion in salaries every year. New York has about a 10% income tax. That is $200 million in tax revenue every year. Forever. He looked at her. Plus all the other taxes, plus the economic activity, plus the businesses that would have opened to serve all those Amazon workers. It probably would have been $400 or $500 million a year in total tax revenue. Pause for effect. but you saved $3 billion in tax breaks that didn't exist. So I guess that is a win. He said it with perfect deadpan sarcasm. Bless your heart. You thought you could spend that imaginary $3 billion on teachers, didn't you? Third official usage. The audience was catching on, and laughter was getting louder. Kennedy stood up and walked to a new poster board someone had set up. Let me show you what actually happened with your Amazon victory. The poster showed a simple graph. Before AOC, 25,000 jobs and billions in economic activities are in it. After AOC, 0 jobs, 0 economic activity, and $3 billion in tax breaks that nobody can spend because Amazon is not there. See, this is what happens when inexperienced individuals write economic policy. No offense to service workers, as it is a noble profession. We need folks who can make a good drink. But maybe, and I am just speculating here, maybe we shouldn't let them redesign the entire American economy. He walked back to his seat and picked up another document. Now, let us talk about your minimum wage proposal. You want $15 an hour nationwide, right? Yes, people deserve a living wage. I am going to let you explain that to Miss Johnson here. Kennedy gestured to the gallery. A woman stood up, mid-50s, professional, but clearly working class. Susan Johnson, owner of a small restaurant in Baton Rouge. Miss Johnson, how long have you owned your restaurant? 32 years, Senator. How many employees do you have? 12 servers, 4 cooks, 2 dishwashers, and 1 manager. And you pay your servers, what? $7.50 an hour plus tips, Senator, which is the state minimum. And how much do they make total with tips? Usually between $20 and $30 an hour depending on the shift. Kennedy turned to AOC. So your federal minimum wage of $15 would actually cut their pay by half. AOC tried to argue that the minimum wage is meant to be a floor. Darling, you cannot legislate prosperity. Kennedy was getting into his rhythm now. You cannot just wave a magic wand and make everyone rich. Economics does not work that way. He turned back to Miss Johnson. What would happen to your restaurant if the minimum wage went to $15? I would have to let half my staff go, Senator. Maybe more. So instead of 18 people making good money, you would have 9 people making okay money and 9 people making $0 because they got fired. Kennedy looked at AOC. That is what happens when influencers write labor policy. Real people lose real jobs. He sat down and pulled out yet another document. One more thing before I let my colleagues ask questions. I want to bring in someone special. A man in his 60s walked to the witness table wearing a suit, exhibiting a professor demeanor. This is Professor Harold Chen. He teaches economics at Boston University. Your alma mater, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. Professor Chen, did you have Representative Ocasio-Cortez as a student? I did, Senator, in macroeconomics back in 2009. How did she do in your class? The professor hesitated, professional courtesy fighting honesty. She received a B+ and graduated cum laude overall from the university. But would you hire her to manage your retirement portfolio? Long pause. I do not think that would be appropriate, Senator. Why not? She has an economics degree from your school. Having a degree and understanding how to apply principles to real-world scenarios are different skill sets. That is professor talk, for she memorized material for tests, but does not actually understand how economies work, isn't it? The professor smiled slightly. Some students are better at theoretical knowledge than practical application. Kennedy grinned, like knowing recipes without knowing how to cook. That is a fair analogy, Senator. Devastating. Her own economics professor gently confirming she does not understand economics. Kennedy gathered his papers. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, let me ask you one more simple question before I yield my time. He looked directly at her. No more smiling. Serious now. In your 7 years in Congress, can you name one single business you helped create? One job you made happen? One company you helped grow? One economic success story you can point to? Silence from AOC. No. Kennedy looked genuinely sad now. Well, bless your heart. Maybe that is because you have never done any of those things yourself. Fourth official usage? This one hurt. You went from service industry to congresswoman, which is quite an achievement, I will grant you. But it is like going from playing video games to driving in a professional race. The skills do not exactly transfer. He stood up. See, the problem is not that you are a socialist. Lots of young folks are socialists. It usually lasts until they get their first paycheck and see how much the government takes. Then they become libertarians real quick. Room laughed. The problem is, you are a socialist who does not understand basic economics. You are writing $40 trillion proposals without knowing where money comes from. You are promising things you cannot deliver. And when folks like me ask simple questions, you cannot answer them. Kennedy looked at the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have more, but I will yield for now. Let some of my colleagues have a turn. I am sure they have questions too. He sat down, but the impact was made. The economics lesson had been taught, and the student had failed. After 2 other senators asked relatively softball questions, Kennedy got his second round. He had been waiting patiently, like a hunter in a blind. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, let us talk about the environmental part of your Green New Deal. The actual climate material instead of the economic theories. He pulled out highlighted sections. You want to achieve net zero carbon emissions in 10 years, correct? Yes, the science is clear that we need urgent action. I agree. Kennedy's enthusiasm seemed genuine. Climate change is real. I believe in science. I also believe in math, which is where we seem to part ways. He pulled out a world map on a big poster board. The United States was colored green. America produces about 15% of global carbon emissions. 15%. That is not nothing, but it is also not everything. He pointed to other countries on the map. China produces 28%. India produces 7%. Russia produces 5%. Between them, that is 40% of global emissions. He looked at AOC. So if we go to zero emissions, which would severely damage our economy, but let us pretend we did it, we would eliminate 15% of global emissions. Meanwhile, China is building 2 new coal power plants a week, every week. Kennedy let that sink in. So we sacrifice our economy, eliminate millions of jobs, spend $40 trillion, and global emissions drop by maybe 10%, once you account for China and India increasing theirs. He pulled out his calculator, his trusty discount store device. That is $4 trillion for every 1% reduction in global emissions. And the temperature impact, according to climate models, is about 0.2 degrees by the year 2100. He looked at the number, looked at her, and looked back at the number. $40 trillion to maybe prevent 0.2 of 1 degree of warming 80 years from now, while other nations laugh at us and take over the global economy. Kennedy put down the calculator. That is not a climate policy, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. That is economic ruin with a green paint job. He pulled out another section of the Green New Deal. Now, this part really interests me. You want to eliminate nuclear power. Says so right here in your proposal. No nuclear energy. Nuclear power has risks. Everything has risks. Kennedy's voice rose slightly. First time he had shown real frustration. Nuclear is the cleanest, most reliable energy source we have. Zero carbon emissions, runs 24 hours a day, whether the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. He pulled out statistics. France gets 70% of their power from nuclear. They have the cleanest energy in Europe and some of the cheapest electricity prices. Meanwhile, Germany shut down their nuclear plants to go green, and now they are burning coal, and their electricity costs 3 times what France pays. Kennedy looked at her like a disappointed teacher. You are against nuclear, but you want zero emissions. That is like saying you want to improve your health, but you will not exercise or change your diet. The math does not work, darling. He pulled out yet another document. This one about jobs. Your Green New Deal promises to create millions of green jobs. Building solar panels and wind turbines and retrofitting buildings sounds great. Except, he paused for dramatic effect. Where are those jobs going to be? Because, last I checked, China manufactures about 80% of the world's solar panels. They make the turbines, too. They control the rare earth minerals needed for batteries. Kennedy's eyes narrowed. So your Green New Deal will create millions of jobs in China. Meanwhile, you want to eliminate oil and gas jobs in America. Mining jobs, manufacturing jobs, all the jobs that Americans currently have. He turned to the gallery. Who here works in energy? Oil, gas, coal, nuclear? Please raise your hand. About 15 people raised their hands. These folks have families, mortgages, kids in school. And Miss Ocasio-Cortez wants to eliminate their jobs to create jobs abroad making solar panels. Does that seem smart to anybody? Silence. Kennedy turned back to AOC. You talk about helping working families, but you are willing to destroy their livelihoods for a climate policy that won't actually fix the climate, because other nations are not participating. He sat back. Bless your heart. I do not think you have thought this through. Fifth usage. Getting more intense each time. Let me show you what your Green New Deal would actually do to real Americans. He called another witness. Man in his early 50s, work boots, oil field jacket. This is Mike Peterson. He has worked on oil rigs in Louisiana for 30 years. Mike, how much do you make? About $90,000 a year, Senator. Support a family on that? Yes, sir. Wife, 3 kids. Put 2 through college already. What would happen if Miss Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal passed and eliminated your job? Mike looked at AOC not with anger, but with genuine concern. I would be unemployed, Senator. I am 53 years old. Been working rigs my whole life. Not qualified to do much else. Probably end up at a big box store making $12 an hour, if I am lucky. Kennedy, so instead of $90,000 a year, you would make maybe $25,000. If they hired me, which is questionable at my age. And your family? We would lose our house. Kids would have to drop out of college. Wife would have to find work. We would be destroyed financially. Kennedy let that sit, then turned to AOC. You willing to look Mike in the eye and tell him his job has to be eliminated so we can maybe prevent 0.2 of a degree of warming 80 years from now while others build more coal plants? AOC tried to respond. We would provide job training and transition assistance. For what jobs? Kennedy cut her off. The solar panel jobs abroad, the wind turbine jobs abroad, the battery jobs abroad. He stood up again, pacing now. See, this is what drives me crazy about the Green New Deal. It is written by people who have never worked in energy, never worked in manufacturing, never worked anywhere that requires actual physical labor. He pointed at his oil field worker witness. Mike there has more practical knowledge about energy in his pinky finger than you have in your whole economics degree. But you want to put him out of work because you saw some charts online. Kennedy pulled out his phone and showed it to the camera. Speaking of online posts, I looked at your account this morning. You posted a selfie from your electric vehicle. A Tesla. You know how much a Tesla costs? AOC didn't answer. About $80,000 for a Model S. Know how much Mike makes a year? About that much. Know how long it would take him to buy a Tesla if you eliminated his job? Never. He could never afford one. Kennedy's voice took on an edge. So you drive around in an $80,000 electric car, powered by electricity that probably came from a coal plant, posting selfies about fighting climate change while wanting to eliminate the jobs of folks who can't afford your lifestyle. He shook his head. That is not environmentalism, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. That is hypocrisy with a green paint job. The room had gone quiet. The humor was fading. This was getting real. Kennedy sat back down and pulled out one final document. Last thing on the Green New Deal. You said the world would end in 12 years if we do not pass it. Remember that? I was using hyperbole to emphasize urgency. You were scaring young people. Kennedy's voice was firm now. You have teenagers having panic attacks about climate change because you told them the world is going to end. That is not leadership. That is fear-mongering. He pulled out studies, mental health reports, stating therapists are reporting increases in climate anxiety among young people, kids having nightmares and depression, all because politicians like you tell them they are going to die unless we spend $40 trillion we do not have on policies that won't work. His voice softened slightly. The world is not ending, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. Climate change is real, but it is not the apocalypse. We have time to develop actual solutions instead of economic suicide pacts that destroy American jobs while others laugh at us. He gathered his papers. But that requires understanding economics, understanding energy, understanding how the real world works, instead of just knowing how to get likes online. Kennedy looked at the chairman. I think I have made my point, Mr. Chairman. This concludes my questions on the environmental aspects of the Green New Deal. He sat down. The Green New Deal had been systematically dismantled, not with anger, not with partisan attacks, but with facts, math, real people whose lives would be disrupted. And the representative had no answers, just empty platitudes and social media posts. Senator Ted Cruz was next to question, but after a few minutes he yielded back to Kennedy. Everyone wanted to see where this was going. Kennedy stood up and stretched a bit. He had been sitting for 90 minutes. You know, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, you call yourself a democratic socialist. I want to talk about that for a minute. He pulled out a new folder, this one thick with documents. See, socialism has been tried before, lots of times, lots of places, and it has failed every single time. But somehow you think it will work here in America if we just add the word democratic in front of it. He opened the folder. Let us start close to home. Venezuela, beautiful country, lots of oil, should be rich. In 1999, they elected a democratic socialist named Hugo Chavez, promised to help the poor, tax the rich, free health care, free education. Sound familiar? Kennedy pulled out photos. Venezuela before and after socialism. Before Chavez, Venezuela was the richest country in South America. Now people are experiencing severe food shortages. The average person has lost 24 pounds from lack of nutrition. not a diet plan. Starvation. He showed more photos. Empty store shelves. Unrest. Poverty. That is democratic socialism in action, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. How did that work out for the Venezuelan people? AOC tried her standard response. That is not real socialism. Every socialist says that. Kennedy laughed. It is never real socialism when it fails. Soviet Union, not real socialism. Cuba, not real socialism. North Korea, not real socialism. He pulled out a list. You know how many countries have tried socialism? Over 40. You know how many succeeded? 0. None. Not a single one. Kennedy walked over to a map of the world on the wall and started pointing. Soviet Union collapsed. Eastern Europe rejected socialism as soon as they could. China only started working when they adopted capitalist reforms. Vietnam, same thing. Cuba, people risk their lives on rafts to escape. He turned back to AOC. At what point do you look at 40 failed attempts and think maybe this is a bad idea? If you tried a recipe 40 times and got food poisoning every single time, would you keep making it? Laughter rippled through the room. Now I know what you are going to say. You are going to mention Denmark, or Sweden, or Norway, the Nordic countries. They are democratic socialists, and they are doing great, right? He pulled out quotes from Nordic leaders. Except they are not socialist. The Prime Minister of Denmark literally said Denmark is not a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. Kennedy showed the quote to the camera. Sweden tried socialism in the 70s and 80s. It failed miserably. They moved back to capitalism with a strong safety net. They have lower corporate taxes than America now. They have school choice and private health care options. He looked at AOC with amusement. You want to be like Sweden? Great. Let us cut corporate taxes, allow school choice, and introduce market competition in healthcare. Oh, wait. You do not want that, do you? AOC looked uncomfortable. See, you like the Nordic welfare programs, but you do not like the free market capitalism that pays for those programs. You want the dessert without making dinner first. Kennedy pulled out tax data. And speaking of taxes, you know what tax rate Denmark has? 25% sales tax on everything, plus a top income tax rate of 55%, plus wealth taxes, plus property taxes. He did quick math. Average Danish worker pays about 45% of their income in total taxes. You ready to tell Americans they are going to pay half their income to the government? Silence from AOC. Didn't think so. See, Americans do not mind some social programs. We have Social Security, Medicare, public schools, but we do not want full state control where the government controls everything and takes half our money. He sat back down. Let me tell you what really bothers me about your democratic socialism, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. It is not the economics. We already established you do not understand economics. Laughter. It is that you are selling a falsehood to young people. You are telling them that in a rich country like America, nobody should have to work hard. Government will provide everything. Life will be easy. Kennedy's voice took on a serious tone. That is not true. It has never been true, and it is cruel to make young people believe it. He called another witness. Young man, early 20s, recent college graduate. This is Marcus Washington, 22 years old. Graduated last year with $50,000 in student debt. Marcus, you voted for Miss Ocasio-Cortez, right? Yes, sir, because she promised to cancel your student debt. That is a big part of why. Yes, and has your debt been canceled? No, sir. Will it be? Probably not. So you were sold a promise that was not delivered. Marcus looked uncomfortable. I guess so. Kennedy turned to AOC. How many young people you think voted for you because you promised free things that you knew you could not deliver? He didn't wait for an answer. That is the problem with democratic socialism, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. It is all promises and no delivery. It sounds great. Who doesn't want free health care and free college and free everything? But somebody has to pay for it. And when you ask socialists who pays, they cannot answer. He picked up his papers. You know what? The most successful economic system in history is free market capitalism. It has lifted billions out of poverty. It has created more wealth, more innovation, more prosperity than any other system ever tried. Kennedy looked directly at AOC. Is it perfect? No. Do some people get rich while others struggle? Yes. But you know what? Poor people in America have smartphones and air conditioning and cars. Poor people under socialism have nothing. They have equality. All right. Equal poverty. He sat back. Bless your heart. You think you are helping people with your socialism, but you are actually hurting them by misrepresenting what is possible. Sixth usage of the hook. Each one more damning. Young people deserve the truth. They deserve to know that success requires work, that prosperity requires freedom, that dreams require sacrifice, not government handouts. Kennedy gathered his materials. Democratic socialism is just socialism with better marketing, and socialism has a history of tragic failure. He looked at the committee members. Maybe, and I am just suggesting this, maybe we should try something that has actually worked instead of rebranding something that has failed 40 times. The room was silent. The ideology had been exposed, the misconceptions revealed, the promises shown to be empty, and the witness still had no answers. Kennedy wasn't done. After a short break, the hearing resumed. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, how many followers do you have on Instagram? AOC looked confused by the question. About 8.5 million? 8.5 million. That is impressive. That is more than most celebrities. Kennedy nodded appreciatively. How many bills have you passed in 7 years in Congress? Long pause. Well, the legislative process is complex. That is a 0, isn't it? Kennedy smiled. 8.5 million followers, 0 bills passed. That is quite a ratio. He pulled out statistics. In 7 years in Congress, you have sponsored or co-sponsored 312 pieces of legislation. Number that became law, 0. Number that even made it out of committee, 3. And those were just naming post offices. Kennedy looked at his notes. But you have posted on Instagram how many times? According to my research, about 4,000 times. That is more than 1 post per day for 7 years straight. He pulled out some of her posts. Fashion photos, restaurant visits, political slogans. Now, I am not saying social media is bad. My granddaughter teaches me about the various platforms. But at some point, you have to actually do the job instead of just posting about doing the job. Kennedy showed one particular photo, AOC at the Met Gala. This one is my favorite. The Met Gala in 2021. You wore a dress that said, "Tax the rich" in big red letters. Very bold, very photogenic. Pause. You know how much a ticket to the Met Gala costs? $35,000. And your dress was custom-made by a designer. Probably cost another $15,000 or $20,000. He looked at her over his glasses. So you spent $50,000 to go to a party with millionaires and billionaires wearing a dress made by a capitalist designer to tell people we need to tax the rich. Kennedy sat back. That is not activism, darling. That is performance art, and not very good performance art at that. He pulled out more financial records. Speaking of your lifestyle, let us talk about your salary. As a member of Congress, you make $174,000 a year, plus benefits, plus allowances. That puts you in the top 5% of earners in America. AOC looked defensive, and yet you present yourself as working class. You talk about struggling families while maintaining expensive grooming habits and wearing designer clothes. You drive a Tesla while wanting to eliminate gas-powered cars that normal Americans can afford. Kennedy pulled out photos of her apartment building. You live in a luxury building in D.C. Rent is probably about $4,000 a month. That is more than most Americans make in a month total. But you are for the working class. He shook his head. See, this is what bothers me about the modern left. You want to be socialist warriors online, but you want to live like capitalist celebrities in real life. You want other people to sacrifice while you attend exclusive galas. Kennedy called another witness, working-class woman, mid-40s, wearing a factory uniform. This is Linda Martinez. She works at a textile factory in South Carolina. Linda, how much do you make? About $32,000 a year, Senator. You got kids? 3. What do you think about Miss Ocasio-Cortez spending $50,000 on a party dress? Linda looked directly at AOC, not angry, just tired. That is more than I make in a year and a half, Senator. I could feed my family for 2 years on what she spent on one night. Kennedy, you feel like she represents working people? No, sir. I feel like she represents influencers pretending to care about working people. Brutal, simple, true. Kennedy turned back to AOC. You see, this is the problem. You talk about income inequality while living like the wealthy elite. You criticize capitalism while enjoying all its benefits. You want to redistribute wealth as long as it is other people's wealth, not yours. He pulled out tax returns. I looked at your publicly filed taxes. You made $174,000, and you donated about $2,000 to charity. That is about 1%. Meanwhile, you want to tax other people at 70%. Kennedy leaned forward. If you really believed in redistribution, wouldn't you give away most of your own money first? Led by example. No answer from AOC. Let me ask you something else. You spent about $40,000 on your campaign committee last year. You know what you spent it on? He pulled out FEC filings, digital advertising, professional photography, social media consulting, basically content creation. He showed the receipts. Meanwhile, you have proposed zero legislation that helped actual working families, zero bills that created jobs, zero initiatives that improved anyone's life. Kennedy sat back. You are not a legislator, Miss Ocasio-Cortez. You are an influencer who happens to work in Congress. The job is just content for your account. He pulled out legislative statistics showing other representatives' success rates. See these other members? They passed bills. They got things done. They worked across the aisle. They actually legislated. He pointed to her stats. You post, you tweet, you stream playing video games, but you do not actually do anything. Kennedy's voice took on that disappointed teacher tone again. And you know what is sad? You probably could do some good if you actually tried. But you are too busy being a celebrity to be a congresswoman. He gathered his papers. Bless your heart. Maybe you should consider a career change. Influencers make good money. You would probably be happier, and Congress might actually get some work done. Seventh and final official, bless your heart. The most devastating one yet, because right now, you are just taking up a seat that could go to someone who actually wants to legislate instead of post selfies. The room was silent. Even Democrats looked uncomfortable. The social media congresswoman had been exposed as all show and no substance, All posts and no policy, all performance and no progress. Kennedy took a long drink of water. The hearing had been going for over 3 hours, but he had one more move. The finishing blow. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, I am going to give you a chance here. A real chance to prove me wrong about everything I have said today. His voice was gentle now, not mocking, genuinely offering opportunity. I am going to ask you one simple question. If you can answer it clearly and specifically, I will apologize for everything I said. I will admit I was wrong. I will even vote for one of your bills. He paused. Let that sink in. But if you cannot answer it, I want you to admit that maybe, just maybe, you do not actually know how to implement your ideas. AOC nodded. What is the question? Kennedy leaned forward. Explain to me step by step how America pays for $40 trillion in Green New Deal spending over 10 years. Not with slogans. Not with tax the rich sound bites. Actual numbers. Actual policy. Show me the math. The room went completely silent. Take your time. I will wait. AOC started. We would implement a progressive tax system, specific rates and projected revenue. Kennedy interrupted. Show me the math. Well, we would need to study the exact numbers. You have had 7 years to study the numbers. You have had this proposal out for 6 years. Surely you have done the math by now? AOC tried again. The wealth tax alone would generate how much? At what rate on what assets? What is the projected revenue, and what is the projected capital flight? She could not answer, started stammering, tried different approaches, each one vague, each one without specifics. Kennedy waited, patient like a teacher waiting for a student to admit they didn't study. After 2 minutes of painful attempts, AOC said the specifics would need to be determined by economists and policy experts. You are supposed to be the policy expert. Kennedy's voice rose for the first time all day. You proposed this. You put your name on it. You told America this was the solution. He stood up. And now, when asked for the simplest possible detail, how do we pay for it? You cannot answer. Kennedy walked toward her table. Let me tell you why you cannot answer. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, it is not because you have not studied enough. It is not because the math is too complex. It is because the math does not work. He picked up all his documents, all the papers and calculations and evidence he had presented over 3 hours. $40 trillion is more than the entire U.S. economy produces in 2 years. You cannot tax your way to that. You cannot borrow your way to that. You cannot print your way to that without destroying the dollar. His voice softened. And deep down, I think you know that. I think you have always known that, but you proposed it anyway because it sounds good, because it gets you on TV, because it gets you followers. Kennedy walked back to his seat and sat down slowly. You know what I think, Miss Ocasio-Cortez? I think you are a smart person who figured out how to be famous by saying things that sound nice but do not work. You found a formula. Promise everything. Blame billionaires. Post online. Repeat. He looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. But that isn't governing. That is marketing. And America deserves better than political marketing from their elected representatives. The room was absolutely silent. So here is my final question for you today, and I really want you to think about this one. Kennedy took off his glasses and made direct eye contact. Do you actually believe the things you say, or are you just playing a character for social media? AOC opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing came out. Because how do you answer that? Say yes, and you are admitting you are willfully uninformed. Say no, and you are admitting you are deliberately misleading. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Kennedy waited. The whole room waited. Finally, AOC said quietly, "I am trying to fight for what I believe is right. That was not my question." Kennedy's voice was gentle but firm. "Do you know how to do the things you promise, or are you just hoping someone else will figure it out?" More silence. Kennedy nodded slowly. "That is what I thought." He gathered his papers. "Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions. I think the witness has answered everything I needed to know, even the questions she could not answer." He looked at AOC one last time. "Miss Ocasio-Cortez, I hope someday you will use your obvious talents and your massive platform to actually help people instead of just playing a socialist online. You have potential. You are smart. You are charismatic. You could actually do some good." Pause. "But first you would have to learn how things actually work. Maybe take some economics classes. Maybe run a business. Maybe manage a budget. Maybe do something, anything in the real world, before trying to redesign the entire American economy." He smiled, but it was sad now, because right now you are just a former service worker with an account and some really questionable economic ideas. And bless your heart, that isn't going to save America. Final usage, not mocking, almost affectionate, but utterly decisive. Kennedy sat down. The hearing concluded shortly after. No other senator wanted to follow that. AOC left quickly. No selfies, no posts, no victory laps, just a quiet exit from a hearing where the country lawyer had systematically, politely, and thoroughly dismantled her arguments with humor, with facts, with Southern charm, masking hard truths. The Oxford-educated professor had given a lesson, and the student had failed. The video went viral before AOC even left the Capitol building. Not one clip, but dozens of clips. Every exchange, every "bless your heart," every moment where she couldn't answer simple questions. Within 2 hours, 50 million views across platforms. Within 12 hours, 200 million views worldwide. Within 48 hours, the most watched congressional hearing in American history. "Bless your heart" became an instant meme used everywhere in tweets, in texts, in conversations. The ultimate polite rebuttal had entered the cultural lexicon. Conservative America was jubilant. Finally, someone had confronted the progressive icon without yelling, without personal attacks, just with questions she couldn't answer and facts she couldn't dispute. And Kennedy had done it with a smile, with humor, with the kind of folksy wisdom that made complex economics understandable to everyone. The T-shirts appeared within days. "Bless your heart" with Kennedy's face. "I'd rather be a bartender than an economist who doesn't understand economics." Ironic pro-capitalism shirts. "Milton Keynes is a town." Mocking her slip. Just a simple country lawyer. Kennedy's fake humility as a badge of honor. Major news played the exchanges on loop. Every show, every hour. Even CNN and MSNBC couldn't ignore it. Jake Tapper admitted on air those were legitimate questions that deserved better answers. MSNBC tried to defend her. Joy Reid called it condescending, but the backlash was immediate. Women from the South responded, "Don't use our accent as an insult." Kennedy was being polite. That is how we talk down here. The cultural divide was stark. Coastal elites saw condescension. Working Americans saw accountability. Political fallout came quickly. Moderate Democrats started distancing from AOC and the Green New Deal. "We support climate action, but we need realistic proposals with real numbers." Nancy Pelosi, asked about the hearing, gave a diplomatic non-answer. Every member brings their own perspective. Some perspectives are more developed than others. Translation: You are on your own, kid. Even some squad members tried to distance themselves. Rashida Tlaib said we are all still learning and growing as legislators. The policy implications were significant. The Green New Deal, already stalled, was now politically toxic. No moderate Democrat would touch it. Even progressives started proposing alternative climate frameworks without the branding. But the most important impact was cultural. For years, AOC had been treated as the voice of young progressive America, smart, savvy, the future of the party. Kennedy's hearing shattered that image, not with partisan attacks, but with simple questions that exposed fundamental gaps. The conversation shifted from "she is the future" to "she is all style, no substance." Young people started questioning her. If she cannot explain how to pay for her proposals, maybe they are not realistic. If she confuses basic economics, maybe she shouldn't be writing economic policy. The college campus reactions were telling. Conservative students felt vindicated. We have been saying this for years. Liberal students were split. Some defended her, saying she is still learning. Others admitted that was bad. Economics professors used the hearing as a teaching tool. This is why you need to understand the actual principles, not just memorize slogans. Kennedy became a folk hero to a certain demographic. Republicans had a new model. You do not have to be angry to be effective. You can smile, use humor, ask simple questions, and dismantle bad policy with facts wrapped in friendliness. The Kennedy method became a thing. Conservative commentators analyzed it. Political consultants taught it. Candidates tried to emulate it because it worked. It was decisive. And it could not be called hateful or partisan or unfair. Just questions, just math, just reality. The Kennedy method was particularly effective with older voters, the 50-plus demographic that remembered when politicians had actual experience before running for office, when expertise mattered more than social media followers. They loved seeing an Oxford-educated former state treasurer who had managed billions of dollars politely expose someone who had transitioned from service work to congresswoman to economic policymaker. It validated their frustration with modern politics, with celebrity politicians, with style over substance. The numbers told the story. Kennedy's approval rating in Louisiana up 15 points. AOC's approval outside her district down 23 points. Green New Deal support down 31 points nationally. Democratic Socialist candidates in midterms lost 38 of 42 races. The hearing had real consequences, not just for her, but for the entire movement. The backlash was swift. Voters wanted pragmatic solutions, not $40 trillion fantasies. Moderate candidates won primaries. Progressive challengers lost. The squad's influence collapsed. By the presidential primaries, no serious candidate wanted her endorsement. Her online following remained high, but her political influence was gone. The figurehead had been exposed as exactly that. A novice who thought social media made her qualified to redesign the economy. And the country lawyer had taught America a lesson about the difference between marketing and governance, between slogans and solutions, between posts and actual policy, all with a smile, a drawl, and a calculator that cost $9.99. Bless her heart, she never saw it coming. 3 years after the hearing, Senator John Kennedy was asked about it in an interview. People ask me all the time why I went after the representative so hard that day. They think it was personal. It wasn't. He settled into his chair. The same folksy demeanor. The same Louisiana drawl. See, I have grandkids. They are about her age, and they are being sold the same falsehoods by the same type of politicians. That government can solve everything. That success doesn't require work. That you can have everything for free if you just tax the rich enough. He shook his head. That is not true. It has never been true, and it is cruel to make young people believe it is. Kennedy pulled out a letter and showed it to the camera. I got this from a college student in Boston. She wrote, I voted for her because she promised to cancel my student debt. Now I realize she can't deliver, but I already made decisions based on promises she knew she couldn't keep. I delayed starting my career, didn't save money, and now I am worse off than before. He put the letter down. That is why I asked those questions, because politicians like that are hurting young people by misleading them. They are selling a fantasy that sounds good, but doesn't work. Kennedy leaned forward. I didn't enjoy embarrassing her. I really didn't. But someone had to ask the simple questions that exposed the truth. And if that had to be a simple country lawyer from Louisiana with a drugstore calculator, so be it. He smiled. The lesson I want people to take from that hearing isn't that she is unintelligent. She is not. She is actually quite smart. The lesson is that being smart doesn't mean you are right, and having good intentions doesn't mean your policies work. Kennedy picked up an economics textbook, the same one he had brought to the hearing. This book has been around for decades. The principles do not change. Supply and demand, opportunity costs, market forces, they work the same whether you like them or not. He tapped the book. You cannot tweet your way around economic reality. You cannot post your way to prosperity. You cannot make promises that math says are impossible and expect people to just believe you because you are young and charismatic. Kennedy stood up and walked to his office window overlooking the Capitol. I love America. I believe in America. And I believe young people deserve leaders who tell them the truth, even when the truth is not pretty. He turned back to the camera. The truth is, life requires work. Success requires effort. Prosperity requires freedom. And dreams require sacrifice. Pause. No government program can change that. No $40 trillion spending plan can eliminate those realities. And any politician who tells you different is misleading you. Kennedy smiled his grandfather's smile. I hope she learned something that day. I hope young people watching learned something. I hope America learned something. He picked up his old calculator, the same discount special. You do not need fancy degrees or expensive tools to understand truth. You just need to be willing to ask simple questions. Do the basic math and not be afraid to call out nonsense when you see it. He set down the calculator, even if you have to do it with a smile and a bless your heart. The country lawyer winked at the camera. The lesson was complete.